Good day to each and every one. So today I am going to present to you my report about data protection or Data Privacy uh, Protection Act. So in this report, I'll be discussing about the general data protection regulation, and this is applicable not only in the Philippines, but I think it's a worldwide data protection regulation act or proclamation. How do you call that? So I searched it from the internet. I couldn't find the Data Protection Act in the Philippines, but I found some sources, but it shows more about laws and sort of like legal legal terminologies and sort of like that, which I couldn't I can't relate to because I was not in the Philippines for a long period of time, and I don't know how to convey the information or the concept of it. So what I am about to tell you or to explain to you today or to um, convey is this report, which was actually um, imparted to us in a training. This is the General Data Protection Regulation. So before we went to online classes, the teachers in our school were oriented about the Privacy Act of the students and the teachers. It is really so important to know your data privacy rights because nowadays, because of the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic, to education or to the learning platforms, it really made a big impact to our um, educational perspectives. So, as we were actually pushing to implement learning online in order for us to impart knowledge to the kids, despite all of these shortcomings that we're facing, we keep pushing online learning or e-learning or remote learning through internet. So um, it's not just because internet is accessible to everyone. It is not just because um, kids are kids are succumb to use internet and they are really techy when it comes to online learning and um, whatever that is. So they have to know their rights. They have to know their rights, their data privacy rights, and us teachers, we need to also know our rights because it's not easy to be breached. Like the data or the personal data of yours will be breached by someone or will be hacked by someone, will be used by someone, will be will be uh, stalked by someone, or we also experience some sort of like catfishing online. So we have to know all of these rights that we should know. We should know in order for us to be protected online. So to start with, let's talk about the General Data Protection Regulation. So what are these? These are a single set of rules for all nations. It supersedes the Data Protection Act in 1998. Now it applies to international organizations that offer goods or services to learners. It requires data protection by design in default and documented accountability. So think about it. Are you familiar with the previous Data Protection Act of 1998? Do you know anything already about the data privacy? So as I told you before, so this is not just a single out kind of information that I'm going to convey to you. This is a worldwide, how do you call that? Worldwide campaign for all the people who are throughout the world, learners, non-learners, individual, locals, corporate employees, employers should know. So we should know the data protection principles. The personal data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner, collected for specified explicit and legitimate purposes, and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. So it should be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. It should be accurate and, where necessary, kept up to date, kept in a form which permits identification of data subjects for no longer than is necessary for the purposes for which the personal data are processed. Processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data. So all of this is, all of these principles are actually talking about accountability principle. So let's go ahead. So think about it. How might you demonstrate accountability with these principles? What procedures does your team, service, school, institute, or college have in place to comply with any of the principles? So first stop, we need to know the personal data. What is this? So any information relating to natural person who can be identified directly or indirectly by that information, through the person's name, identification number, location data, online identifier, pseudonymized data, factors specific to physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity. So there is also another kind of, or this is another aspect of personal data. We call it special categories of personal data. So it is relating to racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, genetic or biometric data processed for the purpose of identification, health, sex life, or sexual orientation. So can you identify the different types of personal data and special categories of personal data that you work with or store? So include the data processed by your team, service, school, institute, or college. Yes. So what is processing? Any operation or set of operations performed on personal data or on sets of personal data. These are collection, recording, receipt, storage, backup, filing, retention, display, scanning, review, deletion, destruction, editing, updating, modification, copying, transmission, transfer, release, loss, mislaying, misdirection. So when you process personal data, when can you process personal data? So we have to categorize this into two: personal data and special categories of personal data. So there should be consent for personal data, necessary for performance of contract, necessary for compliance with legal obligation, protect vital interests of individual, necessary for performance of the task in the public interest, and necessary for the purposes of legitimate interests. For the special categories of personal data, there should be explicit consent, required to comply with employment, social security, or social protection legislation. There should be protection for vital interest of individual. There should be a connection with legal proceedings and administration of justice, information already made public by data subject, necessary for medical reasons or public interest in relations to public health, and necessary for achieving scientific or historical research or statistical purposes. Now think about it. Based on the personal data you previously identified, what are your legal basis for processing those different types of data? So we need to know the conditions for consent. There should be the implied consent is unacceptable for processing. Demonstrable by a statement or clear affirmative action. It should be freely given, specific, informed, and ambiguous. A consent must be obtained for every processing scenario, and a consent can be withdrawn at any time. So let's know our rights. These are the new and expanded rights. Right to be informed, right of access, right to rectification, right to erasure, right to restriction, right to data portability, right to object, and right to prevent automated processing, including profiling. These are also the new and expanded rights. The data subjects must be aware of their rights. Responses must be provided within 1 calendar month. Systems and procedures must be in place to adhere to rights. Documentation of adherence required. If a right is exercised, we must notify any third party we've shared the relevant data with. Think about it. If someone exercised any one of their rights, how would you know or your team go about providing a response? Do you know how to find and access the data? Can you erase it, correct it, or restrict it? So we knew how. We have to know our privacy notices. We have to check our privacy notices, by the way. So it should be presented to data subject whenever new processing is undertaken. Consider a layered approach to notification, and there should be a clear explanation. It must explain personal data being processed, purpose of processing, intended retention, subject rights, source of data, conditions of processing, intended sharing or international transfer, existence of automated decision making, including profiling. Now let's think about it. University staff have a number of responsibilities that help the university to uphold and demonstrate compliance with the Privacy Act. The new few slides detail how we can meet these responsibilities. So what are your responsibilities? To protect personal data. So we must maintain documentation and implement measures to demonstrate compliance with principles. We should document processing activities to ensure transparency and employ data minimization and pseudonymization. The data protection impact assessments. What are these? Description of intended processing and purposes, risk assessment and detail of risk avoidance measures required when using new technologies, profiling, surveilling, processing of special categories of personal data. Processing is likely to result in risk to rights and freedoms of individuals. So another set of responsibilities, this is in terms of data sharing agreements. So there should be a contract laying out multiple party commitments to personal data. It should require or required for sharing personal data with processors or any other third parties out with the university. Ensures compliance with the GDPR or the guidelines for privacy regulation principles and international or third-party transfer requirements. Ensures you are working with a GDPR compliant processor and drafted by contracts team within finance. So what are your responsibilities in terms of data security? Appropriate and secure storage for paper and electronic records, encrypt data on laptops, tablets, memory sticks, etc. Authorize access only, no password sharing. Double check your correspondence addresses and attachments. Do not share information with third parties without data sharing agreements, and destroy records appropriately and securely be aware of your cloud usage. So think about it. How do you meet the requirements of these various responsibilities? Do you know all the personal data that you process? Can you conduct an information audit within your work area or with your team? Do you share data with any third party? And if so, do you have appropriate agreements or contracts in place? How can you demonstrate and ensure appropriate data security? So we've mentioned about all those a while ago, and we can expand it more. So there are actually exemptions. So the exemptions are crime, research and statistics, exam scripts, and confidential references. So in a matter of crime, we can share personal data in order to aid the prevention or detection of crime or the apprehension and prosecution of offenders. So any request from law enforcement should be handled by the police officers. Also, sharing of data can also be done, or can also be can also be done through research and statistics. If you're using personal data for research or statistical purposes, you may be exempt from access, rectification, restriction, and objection rights. Also, it goes with exam scripts. Personal data recorded by candidates during an exam are not subject to right of access or privacy notice requirements. Confidential references as well. So when personal data and references created or given by GU are not subject to right of access or privacy notice requirements. So we're going to be talking about breaches. So sometimes we can't control, or there are breaches that will come along the way. So what does it mean, personal data breaches? So a breach of security leading to accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal data transmitted, stored, or otherwise processed. So breaches must be reported immediately to the Cybercrime Committee. You have that in the Philippines, or to the ICO Cambridge School Hub within 72 hours. This is where we report our data breaches issues. Within 72 hours, we already have the result or the response coming from the hub. Sanctions vary depending on severity and extent of breach and organization's response. So here, as you can see, there are fines. This is not just in this country that I'm teaching, but also it's applicable worldwide. Okay, so this is a flow chart, or where you can actually see the flow of the persons accountable to respond to any data breach issues. So immediately contain and mitigate breach. So if there is a breach issue or data breach occurs, you can actually do two possible actions here. So you can do immediate containment and mitigation breach, and you can also do immediate action through reporting the incident to Data Protection Office. So it goes straight to DPO, and they will be investigating the incident, and then ICO will determine what particular issue is that, and then it will give you report findings and issue recommendations, and your head of the school will be notified about the issue. And also you can go to the other way of solving the issue. As I told you, you can go to, or you can resort to another way of solving the data breach issue. You can have like an immediate action for that. You can contain and mitigate breach by reporting it, going it through here, and it will be identified by the DPO to include incident information in initial report, and then they're going to do the processing of the issue and doing the mitigation and containment. And your head of the school or your school admin will be notified about any security breach or data breach issues. And of course, they're going to be they will talk about possible sanctions if the breach really occurred and someone is responsible for it. So there are different ways that you can handle this kind of issues. Both ways are effective, and I'm not sure about how everything has been mitigated or contained in the Philippines, but this is how the procedure or the flow of solving data breach issues here in the place where, or the country where I'm teaching in. Okay, so that's it for my report. Thank you so much.